The United Nations says the policy of the United States to deport Haitians crossing the border from Mexico could be against international law. This comes as the White House has criticized border guards for using horse reins as whips to threaten people from Haiti seeking refuge in the United States. Al Jazeera footage shows mounted agents charging at refugees and migrants near a camp on the border. There were also reports of officers striking one person's face with a rope. Patty Gulhin has more now from Washington, D.C.
There's growing outrage to video captured by Al Jazeera on the Texas border that showed border agents on horseback using their animals and their reins to try and force back Haitian migrants who had crossed the river in search of food and water, while thousands remain stuck under a bridge in Texas. Now, it did come up at a Senate hearing with the Secretary of Homeland Security. He said he found the video appalling, said there is an investigation, promised that supervisors have been sent to the site to basically make sure nothing like that happens again, but they're still promising to deport the thousands of Haitians. What they're doing now is they're loading them on planes and sending them to different processing centers, and then they will send them back to Haiti. The secretary says that should be done within the next 10 days. The Biden administration is continuing a process set up under the Trump administration, which says because of the pandemic, they can simply deport people right away without even giving them a chance to ask for asylum. There has been political pressure from the president's own party, but his administration doesn't appear that it's going to change course. And if it does, it will likely come much too late for the thousands of Haitians on the Texas border.
Well, as we've heard, thousands of Haitians who've crossed the Mexican border into the United States are being sent back home. Many of them had been staying at a makeshift camp at a Texas border town where conditions are said to be going from bad to worse. As John Holman reports now from Acuña, many are crossing back temporarily onto the Mexican side to avoid deportation.
Look at this, look at this.
Inside the makeshift camp of more than 8,000 people, mostly Haitians, in Del Rio, Texas. They crossed the river illegally and were hoping the US would let them stay. Most of their shelters are just blankets, plastic and even river reeds propped up by sticks, together with a lot of rubbish, but little water or food. Someone inside the camp filmed these images for us. US authorities have largely blocked the media from seeing it, and now they're emptying the place.
Irregular migration poses a significant threat to the health and welfare of border communities and to the lives of the migrants themselves, and should not be attempted. If you come to the United States illegally, you will be returned.
Daily flights are taking off from the US, sending people back to Haiti. To avoid deportation, some people, like Vicky, have crossed back into Mexico. We found him in a park with his 20-month-old son, Adams. But he still hasn't given up on his dream.
I'm 30 years old, and I don't know how many years I have left before I die, but my dream is to enter the U.S. If I cross today and they send me back to Haiti, I'll try it again.
I asked him why he was already talking about dying. He told me he'd been deeply traumatized by parts of the 5,000-kilometer journey to get this far.
Many people died in the jungle. You could be wading through the water and the river would take you away. A pregnant woman, hungry people who couldn't walk and died in the forest. I saw many things, and these images haunt me.
Most Haitians we talked to had similar stories, and now Mexico isn't a safe haven either. Authorities are rounding up migrants here, aiding the US effort. In essence, they're now trapped.
Here we are prisoners. Nobody knows what to do. Some people have decided to go to Haiti. But if they arrive like this, with nothing, it's going to be very tough. With the poverty, the crime, they'll just get even poorer.
So instead, Jean was hoping for the best, heading back to the US and the camp after getting nappies and milk for his son. We left him as he waded into the river, crossing between two countries, neither of which want him. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Acuña, Mexico.
Well, joining us now by Skype from San Antonio in Texas is Nicole Morgan. She's a lawyer with the Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services, which provides free legal services for vulnerable immigrant families. Madam, thank you so much for being with us on Al Jazeera. I mean, I guess before we get into the legal details of this, what was your initial reaction when you saw those very shocking images of these guards mounted on horseback, effectively whipping the immigrants that were trying to cross?
I was horrified. It harkens back to a very dark time in American history of during slavery, in terms of slave patrols, as well as the Ku Klux Klan using horseback and things like that to terrorize Black people. And the fact that during that time, it was also state-sponsored, government-sanctioned terrorism. And the fact that in 2021, that this type of behavior is still going on, oppressive behavior, is disheartening and devastating.
Do you get the sense that this is condoned, that this was perhaps a one-off, or are we seeing more of this, especially now with the latest case, perhaps, of thousands of Haitians trying to cross the Mexican border into the U.S.?
No, I don't believe this is a one-off. I believe that this was the first time it was caught on tape. The fact is that Black immigrants suffer brutality and mistreatment by CBP and ICE all the time. It's just the first time they've had to address it because it's on tape and that the world has now seen it. But no, I don't believe this is a one-off. It's a systemic problem that the Biden administration needs to take a hold of and correct.
I mean, you mentioned the Biden administration. Rightly or wrongly, perhaps people might have been less surprised if they'd seen these images during the Trump administration. President Trump at the time was always very strong against immigration, certainly what he deemed illegal immigration. Again, were you surprised to see this under the Biden administration, or do you think that actually things haven't changed that much?
I was shocked by this continuing under the Biden administration because they made promises on the campaign trail. They promised fair and humane treatment for migrants, and then once in office, they reneged on their promises. It is shocking for them to talk about bringing back the banner of American values and showing the world who we really are, and then continuing the barbaric mistreatment of migrants who legally have the right to come to America to ask for asylum and other deportation relief that can only be gotten if they're on American soil. And to deprive them of that goes against our American values, something that they promised to uphold.
The issue of immigration into the U.S. is huge. I suppose right now we're looking specifically at the situation in Haiti, people that have suffered first a devastating earthquake and then, mudslides. I mean, it obviously has been a particularly difficult time. Now, the question is whether this behavior is actually illegal. The UN says that deporting Haitians right now could go against international law, but even a federal judge in Washington, D.C. Said that this was potentially illegal. So legally speaking, where does the Biden administration stand?
So legally speaking, the Biden administration has decided that in order to negate our laws, they're prohibiting people from entering into our country, right? Because like I said before, in order to apply for asylum in the United States and other deportation relief, you must be on American soil, including TPS. So they're preventing people from actually accessing the very migrant immigration protections that it put in our laws. And it told the world that we will protect people who are being persecuted for their beliefs, their gender, their religion, their political opinion, and then we turn them away because we don't want them to actually access it. I do believe it's illegal using T42, which is a CDC guideline that has nothing to do with immigration.
If I could stop, forgive me for interrupting you, just to clarify for our international audience, because a lot of them would not necessarily know the ins and outs of the American legal system. So what you call the T42, that's Title 42, and that is the key issue that a federal judge in Washington said might be used in an illegal manner. So just explain to us, please, what Title 42 actually is.
Okay. So Title 242 is a guideline by the CDC that talks about keeping out immigrants that have a rare or novel disease that is not in the United States. Right. And so it is to prevent a novel disease from coming into the United States. But it does not have the impact of law. It is not an immigration policy. It is a health policy. Well, COVID is not a novel disease that is not in the United States. It was already here. And they're using this provision within the CDC to deny people their right to enter to ask for asylum. They're not testing to see whether or not these people are COVID positive. They're not giving giving them the vaccine. They're just looking at them, declaring them having a novel disease to deport them, to negate our immigration system, to deprive them of the opportunity to apply for asylum, which under our law they have the right to do once they get on our soil.
The immigration issue in the States, like in a lot of other places, very divisive, often very partisan as well. What do you make of the reaction across the country to, again, these quite shocking images that we've seen? Do you think people have noticed enough?
I hope so. That is our hope in the immigration justice movement, because this is not a one-off. There's the systematic abuses within the immigration process from the time immigrants encounter the government. And enough is enough. And in order for us to get the humane and fair treatment we believe all people deserve, there has to be reform. There has to be an outcry from the American people saying, this is not who we are. These are not our values. People who are seeking refuge can get refuge here. And that needs to be what the American people take away from this. This is not new. This is not a one-off. This is what happens to people every day who are running for their lives, trying to get freedom from the United States.
Nicole Morgan, lawyer with the Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services, speaking to us from San Antonio in Texas. Madam, thank you for sharing your views with us.
Thank you so much for having me.